Happy New Year, and welcome to the public lecture series at Tokyo College, Institute for Advanced Study at the University of Tokyo. My name is Naoko Shimazu, and I am professor at the college, and I am a global historian of Asia. I will be moderating the webinar today. Now, before we start, I'd like to say that today's webinar will be conducted in English. For Japanese speakers, I would like to draw your attention to the availability of simultaneous interpretation in Japanese. Please click the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen, which looks like a little globe, and in order to switch it to Japanese. Also, for the Q&A session, please post your questions in English or Japanese in the chat box on the screen. Now, allow me to introduce today's distinguished panelists. Our speaker is Alastair Morgan, who is the Ushioda Fellow at Tokyo College since 2021, affiliated with the University of Tokyo Graduate School of Public Policy. In 2019, he was a senior visiting research fellow at the War Studies Department at King's College London. Between 2019 and 2021, he acted as the regional security expert and coordinator of the UN 1874 panel of experts on DP, which is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, sanctions. Alastair holds a distinguished record in public service in the United Kingdom. He was the British ambassador to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea from December 2015 until December 2018. Alastair served as Consul General at the British Consulate General in Guangzhou from 2010 to 2014, having previously held the post of Commercial Counselor and Director of Trade and Investment for China in British Embassy, Beijing, from March 2007 to December 2010. Alastair has had two previous diplomatic postings in East Asia, both in the British Embassy in Tokyo. From 1991 to 1996, he was First Secretary, and from 2002 to 2006, he was Counselor, Trade Policy, and Director of Inward Investment. He also worked in Tokyo on loan to the Japanese Ministry of International Trade and Industry from 2001 to 2002. And from 1983 to 1985, he was lecturer in English language and literature at Gakushuin University. Now, to comment, we are privileged to have Kiichi Fujiwara, who is professor at the Institute for Advanced Academic Research and advisor to the president of Chiba University. He is emeritus professor and currently visiting professor at the Institute for Future Initiatives at the University of Tokyo. His areas of specialization are international politics, comparative politics, and the politics of Southeast Asia. He has held visiting positions at the Institute for Advanced Study at Johns Hopkins University, Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., and at the Asia Center at the University of the Philippines. Needless to say, he has a long and distinguished list of publications, which I will not go into in the interest of time. Now, today's topic is the UK, Japan, and the free international order. So without further ado, I shall pass the floor to you, Alastair.
Thank you for joining us in this discussion from Singapore. I'm very grateful for your time. And I'm very grateful to Professor Fujiwara, to Kiichi as well, for doing me the honor of joining the panel. I'd like to thank two other colleagues from Tokyo College for arranging the event, and to thank Tokyo College for having me, for inviting me to Japan as an Ushioda Fellow of the college, and for giving me this platform today so that I can share some ideas as a basis, I hope, for discussion. I should say that although I, for a long time, worked for government, I no longer represent government. So anything I say today is a personal expression. And I'd like to add to that any mistakes I make or anything that's infelicitous is also my own responsibility. I'm afraid sometimes one slips and doesn't always notice until later. The poster, which relates to the, which gives the title of the talk, the UK, Japan, and the Free and Open International Order, really refers to the agreement that was reached between Prime Minister Sunak and Prime Minister Kishida in May 2023 to take the UK-Japan relationship to a new level, a global strategic partnership. And I emphasize the word global and the global ambition of the wish jointly to support a free and open international order. And I drew attention to the questions in the poster. How realistic was this ambition? How much, by working together, can Japan and the United Kingdom actually support global rulemaking and the international order? And how much, in fact, can they even contribute to their bilateral security? And I made the point that the agreement was reached against the background of what was described by the British government as an increasingly contested, volatile world. In my talk, I'm going to run through 7 areas, and I will take some of them quickly if we run out of time. Firstly, I will start looking at global challenges, picking up again that phrase, an increasingly contested, volatile world. Then some of the domestic challenges that may prevent a country from implementing its international objectives, and I'll focus particularly on the United Kingdom. I'll briefly look at the idea of a free and open international order based on the rule of law, because the definition of these terms is not self-evident, but much of the clarity, I hope, will come from the sections that follow, so it will be brief. I will look at the Hiroshima Accord, the May agreement between Kishida and Sunak, and I'll pick out afterwards some areas of cooperation between the UK and Japan and look at some ways in which they work and perhaps some ways in which they don't work. In terms of measuring results, which is a question that I posed as something that any country needs to do when it has international ambitions or other ambitions, I will make some suggestions, but I won't attempt to measure the results myself. And I'll make some brief remarks in conclusion, and I hope that there will then be plenty of time for Kiichi to respond and for us to have some discussion. So turning to global challenges and that expression, an increasingly contested, volatile world, perhaps the first word to pick up is increasingly. And really, when the British government in 2023 used that word increasingly, it meant increasingly even more than in 2021, which was the year in which the United Kingdom had conducted an integrated review of its defense, security, diplomacy, and development policy. And it had found it necessary to revisit that review just 2 years later instead of the normal 5 years later. And increasingly contested, primarily because of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and I'll say some more words about that, but also because of the activity by China in 2022 in coercion in the South China Seas and also in relation to the Straits of Taiwan. But I think in looking at an increasingly contested, volatile world, it's worth asking the question whether there was ever a time when the world was not contested or volatile. And I think it's hard to find a time when it wasn't volatile, but at the back of many policymakers' minds, they are reflecting on the immediate post-Cold War era, when for a time at least, it seemed that there was a greater possibility of a lack of contestation in the sense of less ideological clash between Russia and the West. And you had, for instance, Russia joining the G8. And even then, I suppose you couldn't set aside all ideological differences. After all, the year in which the Berlin Wall fell was also the year of the suppression of the demonstrations in Tiananmen Square. And so you still had the Chinese Communist Party with its Marxist-Leninist organization. But it was possible for people to speak about a point that had been reached where there was no ideological contest and where the order, the institutions, many of which date back to the end of the Second World War, the United Nations, the Bretton Woods financial institutions, the World Trade Organization, were in place and were respected. And you had a relatively brief period where the United Nations Security Council functioned. Of course, there was volatility. Volatility is probably an inadequate word to describe the Bosnian War or the Kosovo conflict in Europe, just to take European examples. But I think that is what people look back to as a less contested era. But now, rather than go through history, and in the interest of time, I want to come to some global challenges as they affect us in 2023. And I've already mentioned the epochal challenge of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And it's epochal because this is an invasion of a sovereign country, contrary to the principles of the UN Charter, by a permanent member of the European Security Council. But the actions of Russia also involve nuclear threats and the weaponizing of energy and of food. But rather than talk about that ongoing conflict, the challenge that I wanted to mention now was the challenge of sustaining the concerted response that the West, if I can use that term, gave to the invasion. And of course, notable as part of the Western response was Japan's response, condemning the invasion, providing non-lethal military aid to Ukraine, providing financial support and humanitarian assistance, and so on. The G7 came together, NATO came together, but can this be sustained? And can the countries that have pledged to support Ukraine for as long as is necessary really continue to do so? The second area from 2023 that I want to mention is the attack by Hamas, which is classified by the British government as a terrorist organization. And it was certainly a terrorist attack in October 23 against Israel, and the response by the Israel Defense Forces. And while many countries condemn the terrorist attack and support Israel's right of defense, and I certainly wouldn't dissent from any of that, many people are shocked by the extent of civilian casualties from the response. And this raises questions about Western capability, the extent to which the West can influence Israel, the United States can influence Israel, Western capacity. Can the United States handle a crisis in the Middle East, particularly should it escalate, and there is that risk, as well as dealing with support for Ukraine. And it also raises questions which I won't emphasize because of time about UK credibility. But I'll return briefly to that. Then there is a question about the United Nations. And to some extent, the situation in Gaza underlines the importance of the work carried out by the UN humanitarian agencies, but it also underlines the impotence, really, of the Secretary General in many ways, and the Secretariat, and the polarization of the UN Security Council. I mention it in connection with Israel and Gaza, but of course it's a major issue in relation to the issues such as the handling of North Korea, the DPRK, and the failure of the Security Council to respond where there is a conflict involving a permanent member. And the question of Western values comes up really where there is support for the West in relation to the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Many nations prepared to speak up and criticize Russia or vote in the General Assembly, but fewer wanting to be drawn in. And many nations seeing that while this is portrayed by the West, I think rightly, as an epoch-making event and a real challenge to the international order, they are aware of other conflicts and other difficulties, and they feel that the Western view, sometimes they may say hypocritical, I wouldn't accept that, but maybe partial. Then, of course, there is the issue of China, and really the growth of Chinese international influence and power is the decisive geopolitical factor in this era of the 21st century. But I've put it down in my notes as an impending challenge because of the risk in relation to the Taiwan Straits. But as I've already mentioned, of course, it's not entirely impending in that we're seeing gray area measures and coercion in the South China Seas, in the East China Seas, and indeed in relation to Taiwan. I've mentioned the DPRK, and of course there's the threat from the DPRK's continued ballistic missile launches and nuclear developments. But I would argue that the DPRK also poses a threat to the international order in its challenge to the United Nations Security Council, which the Council has been unable to address because it is polarized, and also to non-nuclear proliferation and to the NPT treaty from which it walked away. And I'd be very happy to discuss that further. And finally, I think in the background, and we know that this year is a year of many elections internationally, there is the possibility of a second Trump term in the United States. And I won't dwell on that, but it raises questions in terms of values, in terms of the US commitment to alliances and partnerships, commitment to troop deployment, and just a maverick element. And I think, and we'll see this when I briefly go through the areas of agreement between the UK and Japan, the bilateral agreement that the UK and Japan have reached and the partnership ambitions that they have are predicated on supporting and supplementing an actively engaged United States, and not really on substituting for US power, which I think they're not really capable of doing. In terms of the domestic distractions, let me be brief. The UK, as you know, went through the Brexit decision-making process, which stalled a lot of policy making, including in the international policy sphere. Then you had COVID-19 and its lockdowns and its domestic pressures, which put huge challenges again on international relations as well as in the domestic sphere. And then following that, there's been the well-known period of political leadership flux in the United Kingdom with, if you go back to David Cameron and on from there, 5 prime ministers in 8 years, which is almost unprecedented in the United Kingdom. I will also mention the budget challenges because they make it difficult if you don't have the budget to finance your ambitions in defense and strategy and in any other area. This is a year where there may very well be an election in the United Kingdom, and the British ruling party, the Conservative Party, is fragmented, really. It's full of disagreements about many policy issues. And while one cannot predict what the outcome of an election is going to be, there is, if you pay attention to opinion polls, a high likelihood that the Conservative government will lose the election and there will be a Labour government, which then raises, of course, the question of will the new government have the same commitments as the previous government? There are no manifesto pledges as yet. I do not expect fundamental changes in terms of a Labour government, should there be one, in terms of its engagement with Japan, say, but the Shadow Defense Secretary has spoken of an even greater focus on the Euro-Atlantic area, which might mean some lesser attention to the Indo-Pacific. I think that this is a misreading, really, of the policy position of the current government, which I will elaborate a little bit more, but you can't rule that out. I won't say more about domestic distractions in Japan. I would like to express my condolences and sympathy for the victims of the Noto Hanto earthquake and the earthquake in that region, and for the Japan Coast Guard plane fatalities. A domestic crisis of that kind, even if it's caused by a natural disaster, naturally requires attention and takes attention away from international issues and other issues. But I would say that successive domestic natural disasters in Japan have revealed some of the strengths of Japan in terms of the resilience of its people and the cohesion of its society. And I'm sure that will be the same again. In terms of political leadership, I think I will leave it to others, perhaps to Kiichi, to comment, but clearly the kickback scandal and the party funding scandal affecting the Abe faction in the Kishida government is undermining the government to some extent, and clearly also Prime Minister Kishida's popularity is not at a high level. Whether that affects international affairs is harder to say. It certainly didn't prevent the agreement of the Hiroshima Accord or other agreements that Japan has had. Very, very briefly, the idea of a free and open international order based on the rule of law might be said to combine concepts that were developed in relation to a free and open Indo-Pacific, which Prime Minister Abe initially developed and which Prime Minister Kishida has taken further, and which has now been adopted by many countries, including the United Kingdom. Combining that with the idea of a rules-based international order, a term which has come into some disrepute, but the idea of rules and order are still valid. In relation to the free and open Indo-Pacific, the notions of freedom include freedom from coercion and freedom from force affecting sovereignty. And openness means openness in terms of navigation, openness to trade, but openness also in terms of avoiding blocks and participation by nations inside and outside the area. And many of those ideas can carry over into the broader concept of free and open international order. An order, of course, could mean just the opposite of disorder, avoiding chaos, but it means something more than that if it's based on the rule of law. It means respect for codes of law that have been agreed multilaterally or plurilaterally, and respect for the architecture, which I have already referred to in terms of the architecture dating back to the end of the Second World War, but also organizations like the G7 and the G20. Now, all nations justify their actions, and I think you would find it hard to find a nation that claims not to respect the UN Charter. And indeed, there is a group called Friends of the UN Charter, which was actively established by Russia and China and other countries closely associated with those two. But I think, as I've already said, in terms of challenges to the rules-based international order, the British government has drawn attention in the Hiroshima Accord, in its integrated review, not just to these countries, but to Russia, to China, and to the DPRK. But you could also mention Iran and Syria. And in terms of, if you want to call them threats or challenges to the rules-based international order, I think we shouldn't be blind also to ourselves. I don't think we are our own worst enemies. I think the external threats are greater, but insofar as we don't ourselves observe the rules, or we believe we can operate outside of the rules, we undermine the order from which we benefit and which we want to sustain. And I think you can look at this in terms of, if I take some United States examples, and it's not only the United States that one should look at, you can have US actions in relation to the WTO, which have reduced the effectiveness of the World Trade Organization. The fact that the US Congress has not ratified the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea, though the US administration treats it as international common law. There was the decision by the US to walk away from the JCPOA agreement with Iran, to walk away temporarily from a climate change agreement. And then there was the operation in which the British government was also deeply involved, the war in Iraq. And when nations point to hypocrisy or to one-sided views, they will often refer to the war in Iraq. I'm not going to argue that out now, but it's part of the background. Clearly, the institutions of the international rules-based order are not all working exactly as they should. And the World Health Organization is another organization I would mention where, again, actually at one point there was a US threat to withdraw from the institution. But these are among the institutions that the UK and Japan want to work together to sustain. Let me go more quickly than I had intended through the agreements and policies of the UK and Japan. Otherwise, we will be out of time. So the Hiroshima Accord, which, as I said, was agreed in May 2023 as an enhancement of a UK-Japan global strategic partnership, set out some shared values between the UK and Japan. And the values mentioned are freedom, democracy, rule of law, fundamental human rights, and open and fair trade. And as I also said, the agreement was reached at what both the British government and the Japanese government described as a turning point in history, where they were determined, despite the background, to strengthen the free and open international order based on the rule of law, to uphold the principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. And the challenges that they mentioned went wider than the ones I've listed, but in the interests of time, I won't go through them. They set out three specific commitments: strengthening shared UK-Japan security capabilities, and that involved a recognition of the inseparability of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific areas, deepening the economic relationship and championing free, fair, and resilient rules-based international economic order, and leading efforts to deliver a better and more sustainable future for all. Now, I could run through the areas of those three targets, but I'm not going to in the interest of time, but can come back to more detail later if necessary. I've already mentioned the document, the policy document, the 2023 Integrated Review Refresh, which sets out the UK's international security policy. And that underpins the agreement and is very, very close in many respects to Japan's national security strategy, which I will also turn to quickly. And the main conclusion of the Integrated Review Refresh was that unless democracies like the UK and Japan, or like the UK in this case, do more to build their resilience and to out-cooperate and out-compete those who are driving instability, the global security situation will deteriorate. And in terms of the global security situation, they picked up 4 trends, which were the shift in the distribution of global power, the increase in interstate systematic competition over the nature of the internal order, rapid technological change, and worsening transnational challenges, such as global warming. And there were 4 campaign priorities to shape the strategic environment, working with like-minded countries, but also working with others. And there's a recognition by Japan and by the United Kingdom of the need to cooperate with China in certain areas and to work with others who do not share all values, including democratic organization. A need to commit more to our own defense and deterrence, with a commitment to reach as an ambition 2.5% of gross domestic product spent on defense, and with 2.2% as a floor, and recognizing the primacy of the Euro-Atlantic field, but also the significance within that of the NATO commitment, but of programs like the Global Combat Air Program with Japan and the AUKUS agreement with Australia and the United States. Third target, to address vulnerabilities in country and weaknesses, including by working with partners. And fourthly, to invest in the UK's unique strengths. Now, in terms of Japan's global security strategy, Japan sets out its values, which are very similar to the values that I've already outlined in relation to the Hiroshima Accord, and the security objective of working with the United States and like-minded countries to achieve a balance in international relations, which will defend Japan but prevent coercion, so that the status quo can be maintained. I haven't expressed that very well, but because of the interests of time, I'm going to move on quickly rather than go through the details of Japan's policy. Though I should mention the commitment to increase defense expenditure to 2%, and the commitment to try to reach a point of self-reliance in terms of being able to defend Japan with its own capabilities by 2027, recognizing the increasing difficulty that the US has to meet all its commitments, despite being its great global comprehensive power. I'm going to move over. I was going to speak about the details of the free and open Indo-Pacific, but I think they're quite well known and we can come back to them. Let me just very quickly now run through a large number of issues. And I apologize if this is too difficult for the interpreters. I wanted to mention some areas of UK-Japan cooperation, starting with trade and investment, which used to be, it's still important, but it was very much at the heart of the relationship. And I think one of the changes we have seen over the last couple of decades has been an increasing emphasis on security, and the trade and investment supports that, but it's perhaps had less prominence than it had before. I wanted to mention Japan's achievement in rescuing the comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that is a sign of what a middle power like Japan can do after the United States walked away from the TPP, and the importance for the UK of joining the CPTPP and Japan's support for that. I wanted to mention some areas where the UK and Japan can work together, including within the WTO, and we could discuss this further, but certainly in areas of standard setting and rulemaking, whether it's in telecommunications, data and digital trade, new areas like AI, Japan and the UK can work closely together. Japan and the UK, after Brexit, formed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which broke new ground in terms of trade agreements. It went beyond the EU agreement. And this is another example of rulemaking. And some of those developments are now being negotiated by the EU with Japan for enhancing the EU agreement. But I should say that despite that agreement, while Japan-UK trade is currently increasing, Japan's ranking as a trade partner for the UK has slipped, and UK-China trade is 4 times the volume of UK-Japan trade. Japan is still the leading foreign direct investor from the Asia-Pacific region in the UK, but we could look again at some of the impacts of Brexit on foreign direct investment. And as a percentage of global investment in the UK, again, Japan's share is shrinking. Now, turning to defense and security, rather than go through the detail that I had planned to cover, what I would like to do is point to the consistency of UK-Japan approach in this area, going right back to 2012, even before the Abe government, where then Prime Minister Cameron and Prime Minister Noda set out their aspirations for defense cooperation, and with remarkable consistency, despite changes in approach towards China, despite the global climate, despite changes in Prime Minister, this has been followed through in terms of treaties reached between the UK and Japan relating to defense cooperation, sustained intergovernmental cooperation, and now a major defense equipment project, the Global Combat Air Program, with Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom to develop a new generation of fighter aircraft. And that is important, not just in terms of providing a new system which will be central to Japan's and the United Kingdom's defense needs, but in terms of the defense equipment base and the linkages between them. We have seen close cooperation between the Japan and the United Kingdom on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, including monitoring of sanctions violations. But the point I would like to make as a caution is that despite this closer cooperation and an attempt to achieve interoperability, this cannot substitute for self-defense capability or for the relationship which either country has with its ally, the United States. I will move over the importance of the rule of law in the maritime domain and just say that the United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea is as important to the UK as it is to Japan, and that both speak out firmly on the rights. And now I'm being asked to draw my remarks to a close at this point, and that means that I've not been able to go through some of the other areas of cooperation, but I hope we can cover them in discussion. But let me then instead just turn to the final points, and just say that I think that UK and Japan support for a free and open international order is, of course, desirable, maybe even necessary, but it's not in itself sufficient. It's not intended by either country to be a unique arrangement. It's seen as part of a network of partnership agreements supplementing the relationship with the United States. And it is of value where the United States is engaged. Of course, were you to get to a situation where the United States were to walk away from its commitments, then you might see the partnership as even more necessary. But the challenge to achieving the objectives would be even greater. I think in terms of a role for the United Kingdom and a role for Japan, the mission of seeking to sustain a rules-based international order is a very challenging but fitting ambition for middle powers who are powerful but with vulnerabilities, but with some aspects of great powers, but neither of whom is a superpower. And I will stop there with my truncated remarks. And I hope that when I repeated myself at the beginning, you were able to hear what I said. And there is now time, I'm pleased to say, for Kiichi to respond and for some discussion.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, Alastair, for a very comprehensive analysis of so many complex situations which have developed in the world over the last 2 years or so. So now we're going to ask Kiichi to offer comments, and I thought it would be appropriate for Alastair to respond to some of Kiichi's comments after Kiichi gives his comments. So yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Naoko, and thank you, Alastair, for a wonderful presentation, actually. That was at once comprehensive and also assured of a sense of balance, which is something that we really need in this turbulent world that we live in. As you have mentioned, Prime Minister Sunak and Prime Minister Kishida agreed on the Hiroshima Accord in May 18th, 2023, where they said global challenges can only be addressed through shared actions. And in fact, although UK-Japan relations are very good indeed, it really does not make sense if we do not place the bilateral relations in a global context and address the challenges that we face. Now, what is the world we live in? Where we live in an age of war, and excuse my very severe use of words, but the world is illustrated by the primacy of geopolitics. The first, of course, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has caused massive displacement of people. In Ukraine, a loss of civilian life in an apparent violation of the international humanitarian law. And then Hamas's attack on Israel and Israel's attack on Gaza both violate international humanitarian law to the extreme. And they also carry possibility of a regional, if not a global, escalation of war, and that continues to worry us. And here I would like to point out that Kishida administration, unlike the Abe administration, changed Japan's policy toward Russia and joined the Western sanction regime against Russia. This was a major reversal because Prime Minister Abe was trying to work with Russia with an expectation that the Kuril Islands will be returned to Japanese control. So we have two major wars going on with a large loss of civilian life. And also relations with China has become much confrontational, to say the least, and Chinese military buildup is the most significant expansion of military capability since the end of World War II, and that has alerted not only East Asian nations, but also NATO member states. And the UK was among the earliest to express concerns about China, where China was accepted as a business opportunity and was also a major threat to international stability. And that has led to the strengthening of alliance and increasing interconnectivity of alliances. In East Asia, we see Japan's security strategy of 2022, and that has led to a major reversal in Japan's defense policy. And that has not only led to increasing cooperation with Australia and, of course, the United States, but also UK. And we see a kind of conversion of two alliances, the Euro-Atlantic Alliance and the Indo-Pacific Alliance working together. NATO is closely associated with Japan's defense, and for that matter, Australia's or ROK's defense. One of the missing links in the alliance network was one between ROK and Japan. But in year 2022, there was a meeting in Camp David where leaders of Republic of Korea, United States, and Japan agreed on several platforms, and security is one of them. And I don't think I have to tell you that the relationship between Republic of Korea and Japan has been a rocky one, but we see a major strengthening of relations here. So in this broad context, China's military buildup has somehow caused the strengthening of the Western alliance. But we have to take a look at domestic politics. And as Alastair has pointed out about UK politics already, where the Tories are quite divided, and there is a likelihood that Labour might win the next election. In Japan, I think Alastair was a bit too kind to the support level for the Kishida administration. And your choice was not at a high level. Actually, it's one of the lowest level of support given to a government. It's not only about the party ticket income kickbacks, where more arrests are expected. In the very near future, we now observe a collapse of the Abe faction or the Seiwakai in the LDP, which was the strongest faction in LDP. And I hope you can hear me. Okay, then I'm going to go on. And we see turmoil in Japanese party politics, although there are really no significant alternatives given to the voters at this moment. And then there is a possibility of the second Trump administration. This is something that I rather not think about, really. But if there is a difference between Biden and Trump, there is a possibility that the U.S. might pull out support to Ukraine, and that is a very possible future. When it comes to China, although Trump has been tough on China, the U.S. policy toward China during the Trump administration was actually more focused on trade regulations. And the focus on geopolitics was quite secondary, to say the least. And there was less attention given to alliance structures. U.S. was as if U.S. was actually pulling out from NATO. So that is a turbulence that we see. A free and open international order is a concept that I fully support. But at the same time, what we observe is actually an erosion of a free and open international order, where norm-based order is moving increasingly toward a power-based order, as shown in the UN system. The UN system was always quite conventional in many ways, where the sovereignty of member states was of paramount importance, but there was a gradual movement away from the classical Westphalian character or the San Francisco system toward a more norm-based order, including activities in the UN Security Council. We see a backtrack here, and the Security Council could do nothing really to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Their role in the civil war in Sudan, for example, is quite limited, to say the least. The UN system is backtracking into a very classical Westphalian system. And then we also observe a backtracking of the liberal international order that was proposed by the United States. And the members of the liberal international order is increasingly only members of the US-led alliance, which means that not only Russia and China, but also Turkey, Brazil, South Africa, and India, all those nations are not credible actors in the rule-based international order that we imagine. There was an expectation that the liberal international order would increase, and the members would increase. There will be more rules written into law, custom laws becoming UN-led multilateral conventions, and all those hopes are now increasingly limited. And also, I have to say that the role of trade has changed dramatically. In the old days, major powers especially the United States, were the promoters of free trade. Free trade, of course, accompanies winners and losers, but nonetheless, there was an opportunity. It was an opportunity that an increasing volume of trade would lead to less possibility of the use of force. And of course, that was the expectation of US policy, and for that matter, Japan and UK's policy toward China, that increasing volume of trade would somehow lead to a more credible stability and also possible changes to an open society in China. It didn't really work that way, did it? And we now see an end of engagement policy and less attention given to trade. And here I'd like to stress too that the Biden administration is paying very little attention to the role of trade policy in international affairs. And finally, the expectation for the multinational, multicultural, multiracial, and multi-religious open international order is giving away, unfortunately, to a primacy of national identity and focus on sphere of influence. UK and Japan are two nations that remain in the international and open free order, but our friends have come quite limited. We are challenged from domestic politics, and also members of this order is decreasing, and I hate to say this. And I have a few questions that I wish to ask Professor Morgan or Alastair, if I may. The first question, of course, is North Korea. The missile test and the nuclear test of North Korea is an obvious challenge to the UN, United Nations, NPT, and international order as we speak of. And at the same time, the possibility of direct action or invasion may be limited. They may be aggressive, but their objective may not be as aggressive as we imagine. So I'm puzzled about this, and this is a point that I'd like to ask Alastair, partly because you served as the ambassador to DPRK. The second point is about the conflict in the Taiwan Straits. Your choice of words were quite careful and controlled. You didn't, although you gave us attention to the anxieties rising from the rise of China, you did not argue that the Taiwan crisis is an imminent danger at this moment. I actually agree with you, but I want to push you further. How dangerous is it? And the third question would be the overthreat of Western military engagements. The United States is aiding Ukraine and aiding Israel, and at the same time facing China, and that goes for all members of the Western alliance. But that also leads to a great difficulty in facing three crises simultaneously, and also there is Ukraine fatigue. There has always been a doubt whether NATO is really interested in the Indo-Pacific region, where the Atlantic Alliance is of great importance facing Russia at this moment. So I'd like to ask you about the overthreat. There are other questions I want to ask, but I'll limit my question to yet another, and that is economic diplomacy. You have had experience in trade policy. right now, facing China, the talk in Tokyo is all about economic security and maintaining a supply chain that is not dependent on China. And although I do support my colleagues working on economic security, economy has also been a tool that Tokyo has used in conflict resolution. When it comes to Japan's ties with ASEAN nations, economic aid was the key tool for Tokyo's policy. The United Kingdom has been very successful in face of many of its former colonies gaining independence. The Commonwealth gave a framework that somehow controls potential conflicts that might arise in the region. And here again, economic diplomacy was of critical importance. So the blunt question is, can trade be a tool for foreign policy today? So these are my three questions, the tough questions that I can't really answer. One, DPRK, and two, Taiwan, and three, economic diplomacy. And I'd like to end my comments here. Thank you.
Well, Kiichi, thank you very much for your masterly response and for your questions. I'm going to answer the questions briefly and no doubt unsatisfactorily, because I'd like to hear more from you. In terms of capability, clearly the DPRK is very dangerous with intercontinental missiles and tactical missiles, and we assume functioning nuclear warheads. In terms of intent, it would not make sense from my Western perspective for the DPRK to instigate a conflict. So in the interests of the DPRK, I think deterrence and threat rather than conflict is in their interest. But I'm not sure that they see it in the same way. And I think that it's difficult to read exactly what their intentions are in relation to the Korean Peninsula. And I think there is a risk of conflict. And I also think that where you have a policy of both sides responding to the other, then the risk of accidental conflict is increased. How far that would spread or could be contained is a different issue. So it's right to keep trying to tackle this, but we have no good solutions. In terms of the Taiwan crisis, I would rather defer to you. I think one of the challenges with the Taiwan crisis from a UK perspective, I speak as an individual rather than for government, but is of course that the UK recognizes the one China policy. So it is not directly comparable with Russia and Ukraine in terms of sovereignty. But the UK is very, very clear on a peaceful solution and reconciliation, dealing with problems. And it's very clear about the consequences of the Taiwan conflict, including economically. What would happen if there were a Taiwan conflict in terms of the involvement of powers who don't have defense arrangements with Taiwan? I'm not sure, but I'm sure that the UK would be involved in backfilling in some area, in economic responses and sanctions, and of course in issues like evacuation. In terms of overstretch, I think the risk is enormous, even for a superpower like the United States, which can, as it likes to say, walk and chew gum at the same time. It can handle more than one issue and more than one conflict, but there is a limit. And certainly if you get to a much smaller military or defense capability like the UK's, the challenge is great. And there are still fundamental questions about how much the UK can do out of the Euro-Atlantic area anyway, and indeed even whether it can meet all its commitments in the Euro-Atlantic area, given what the invasion of Ukraine has shown about the needs for ammunition and the risks. In terms of economic diplomacy, I agree with the points you made about the approach of the Biden administration and also the Trump administration before that in terms of international organizations and the WTO. Clearly, one area where economics has been used as a tool of diplomacy has been in the area of sanctions. And I think that is again an area where we risk being seen by middle ground powers as two sides of the same coin. There is a reason for sanctions, and if you cannot have the UN functioning, there's a reason for unilateral sanctions. But to middle ground powers, they may look very much like economic coercion of a kind used by others. Of course, building trade and investment relations can support ties and good diplomatic relations, but I don't believe that in itself trade prevents conflict. I wish it did, but I don't think it does. And the Commonwealth does have value in terms of values and in terms of relationships, but I think it's no substitute for other aspects of the international order, which, as you have said, are under threat in many ways.
Yes, Kiichi, if you'd like to sort of say a few words, I think we could do that. Thanks.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you, Alastair. And in fact, I hate to say this, but I agree with you on the points you've made. First of all, we can never really be sure about the intent of DPRK, and it might be defensive, but there is also a possibility that a short-term use of force, there could be a wishful thinking on the North Korean side for the possibility of a short-term victory, short-term war. On Taiwan, this is an area of contestation. China has not started a war yet, and I dare say that the likelihood of a use of force is higher in, say, for example, the borders between India and China. There has been skirmishes. The use of force in the Taiwan Straits would almost inevitably invite a major war. But at the same time, the Chinese government is not limiting its rhetoric. I do think that there is a possibility of China somehow becoming more less extreme. As in the choice of words that Xi Jinping used in the summit meeting with Biden was more measured. Although we cannot really read too much into this. Having said that, their fear of economic sanctions is great. Beijing is so afraid about being imposed of a sanction like the one that was imposed on Russia. And that is actually a tool that we are using at this moment. For the middle ground powers like Japan, and for that matter, ROK, and this is where we can cautiously deal with China. And we are expecting a summit meeting with China and South Korea and Japan this year. Although there are domestic challenges in both ROK and Japan, if we can deal with this carefully, then this could be building a guardrail without accepting the use of force in the Taiwan Straits, which is disastrous. So that would be a careful management of the economy. And as you point out, increase of trade does not decrease the possibility of conflict. The volume of trade in Europe was the highest before World War I, as we are aware of. Looking at domestic politics in China, there is very little ground for wishful thinking. But nonetheless, we do have to avoid a major war here. So we need both deterrence and a careful management of economic relations with China. And back to you, Naoko.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this incredibly interesting and important discussion we've been having here between Alastair and Kiichi. I think it might be a time to change direction a little bit about our discussions and perhaps we might like to ask Alastair to shed a bit more light on this idea of free and open international order, which obviously has been proposed as a result of the bilateral agreement between the United Kingdom and Japan. And we have a question here from the audience which concerns this very issue. So we are facing a year of many elections, many important elections around the world this year. And this may also have implications for changes in administration for Japan and the United Kingdom. So the question is, are parties in either country emphasizing the free and open international order in their election platforms? For listeners supporting a free and open international order, is there a way for everyday citizens of both nations to encourage current and rising political administrations to give this free and open international order more attention in their developing political plans? So I suppose the question is actually about how much currency has this idea have had or is gaining in each of the national publics. So Alastair, would you like to start? And then maybe Kiichi, if you have any comments as well, you'll...
So the United Kingdom is likely to have an election this year, though in fact it doesn't have to be until January next year. And neither party none of the parties has yet put forward its manifestos. So we have yet to see how much there will be on international affairs and whether this terminology will be used. It is very much part of the UK's, the present government's language, and indeed the free and open Indo-Pacific is incorporated into the integrated review, so adopted from Japan. In terms of ordinary people and influencing the governments and electors, I think it is as electors, as an electorate, that they're going to have some say, but I can't immediately think of ways for them to make their voice heard. Had there been more time, I would have spoken more about people-to-people relations bilaterally and in terms of awareness foreign policy issues and international relations. But I'm going to stop there and hand over to Kiichi.
Thank you, Naoko. As to the concept of free and open international order, I think it's a fair bet to say that the ODP would mention the need to keep a free and open Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific being a word that was proposed by Japan and accepted by many, and this has become a major symbol signifying Japan's current foreign policy, and that is quite likely. Having said that, the opposition parties will address the it's an old debate, but an objection to an increase in the defense budget, which is tied to an increase in the tax rate. If there are two things that the Japanese public reacts very strongly, that is one, a tax, and then two, defense. And when the two are connected to each other, the government faces a strong challenge. And I believe that would be the case this time again, especially because the leading opposition party, Riken Minshuto, the Constitutional Democratic Party, runs on that platform. It is unlikely to change. That's what I can say at this moment.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, I actually do have a question that I've been keeping, and as we have Alastair here, something that you actually didn't dwell on very much was the UK's relationship with the European Union. And as a result of Brexit, obviously, it's got very complicated. But how do you see this sort of relationship developing in the future? Because there have been some developments in the past year or so. So I just wonder, because that would have implications for Britain's relationship with the rest of the world, and you may even have some implications for this global partnership agreement with Japan as well.
Yes, I think that's right, Naoko. Thank you very much. In terms of the likely platform for a Labour government, if there were to be one, I think one of the areas of emphasis they will have is on improving relations with the EU, meaning the institutions of the EU, as well as with the member states of the EU. You mentioned developments in this last year. There was a Windsor framework agreed, which resolved or largely resolved issues relating to Northern Ireland and removed some of the difficulties over engagement between the UK and the EU. And as in terms of the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as well as the response by NATO members and the G7, which I mentioned, the need to work closely together in Europe on issues like sanctions, but more broadly concerning the threat from Russia, has led to much closer relations between the UK and the EU institutions, as well as the member countries. And so there are many reasons, I think, to be more positive now about relations between the EU and the UK in the broad sense than before. And I think in some specific areas, like the agreement to the Horizon program, which relates to exchanges and research cooperation, you've seen movements there. So I'm positive, but there are still tensions internally in the UK, which could make relations difficult in future. But Kiichi, do you have a perspective on this?
Well, this I totally agree with you. The stronger relations across the channel actually came from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where UK, Germany, France, and not only NATO members, but the members of the European Union worked together in unison. And although there are dissenting voices in the European Union, it is not against UK. We see a strong trade relationship between Tokyo and London, for that matter, India and UK and New Zealand and UK. But these are not a substitute for the continent. We need better trade relations across the channel and also between UK and Japan or Australia, New Zealand. I hope this will move in that direction, but one never knows because if I may say so, an opposition to the European Union is not only limited to the conservative side of the Tory supporters. We find that in Labour supporters as well.
That's correct. May I add a couple of points prompted by what you've said, Kiichi? One is about bilateral relations and as it affects the Indo-Pacific, which is that I think these partnership agreements should not be in competition with each other. Obviously, when AUKUS was established, France lost a massive submarine contract and was very upset by the way AUKUS was announced. But it's welcome that UK-French relations in relation to the Indo-Pacific are now back on an even keel, with the UK and France reaching an agreement in principle about deployment of aircraft carriers to have permanent presence in the Indo-Pacific. And the second point I'd like to make about the EU, and picking up some of the points you made about trade and diplomacy and trade and rulemaking too, is that of course the EU collectively is in some respects, in economic respects, a superpower. And that when it comes to economic rulemaking, in a way that I think is not the case for defense and security, the EU can play a superpower's role in international work on standards and things.
Wonderful.
Right. Well, I think we unfortunately are running out of time, and I do apologize to the two questions that came in, but one of which actually was about the UK's trade identity. Now, so I think we'll close this session, and I think on behalf of Tokyo College and the audience, we'd like to thank Alastair Morgan for his most excellent, comprehensive review analysis of the current relationship between United Kingdom and Japan, and also Kiichi for really enriching the discussion, giving depth and width to what's been discussed today. Now, before I tune out, I'd just like to apologize on behalf of Tokyo College for the initial technical hitch we experienced in the beginning of this session, where I think some of Alastair's initial comments had sort of, the sound went on and off, and as well as apparently there were some sound problems with the Japanese interpretation as well. So many apologies for that. And we hope very much to welcome you back to our future sessions. And well, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.